Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Jag heter Dan Alfjorden. Här är våra rubriker. Biden om gränskrisen. Jag har gjort allt jag kan göra. Internationella valutafonden säger att socialt skyddsnät behövs när AI kommer. Spanska jordbrukare ansluter sig till protestvågen. Nicole Kidmans nya serie kan inte ses i Hongkong. Ntd's specialserie om kommunismen fortsätter. Denna gång om revolution på export till öst. Mitt under försöken att åtala en av sina kabinettsmedlemmar säger president Biden att han har gjort allt för att ta itu med invandringskrisen. Men representanthusets talman Mike Johnson köper inte det. Ntd's Arian Pastar har en uppdatering om gränssituationen.
Texas visar fortfarande inga tecken på att följa uppmaningarna från Biden-administrationen att lämna Shelby Park i Eagle Pass. Detta efter att 26 allmänna åklagare skickat ett brev till Biden-administrationen den 29 januari. De skriver: "Vad ni bör göra är enkelt, tillämpa lagen och skydda gränsen. Om ni inte kan få er själva att upprätthålla lagen, flytta på er så att Texas kan göra det." På tisdagen frågade Fox News president Biden om man kunde göra mer för att säkra gränsen.
I can do. Give me the power. I've asked for the very day I got in office. Give me the border patrol. Give me the people the judges. Give me the people who can stop this and make it work right.
Husets talman Mike Johnson svarade på Bidens kommentarer och sa att han antingen ljuger eller är felinformerad. Han säger att Biden kan begränsa inresor, påbörja snabba avlägsnanden, obligatorisk internering och annat. Och medan Texas fortsätter att installera stängsel fortsätter den olagliga invandringen att öka i Kalifornien. Fox News rapporterar att gränspolisens sektor i San Diego grep över 1300 illegala invandrare bara under måndagen. 160 av dem är kinesiska medborgare. En del av en lastbilskonvoj lämnade Florida på tisdagsmorgonen och är på väg till Louisiana. Lastbilschaufförer från hela landet planerar att hålla möten i städer längs gränsen på lördag.
And the city of Denver has become the latest city struggling to support all arriving immigrants. NBC News reports that the city is now limiting the days immigrants can spend at city shelters. And a city hospital is reportedly asking for $10 million to cover unpaid medical bills for immigrants. The city's mayor says that he will need $100 million throughout the year of 2024 to support all arriving people. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Vilken är den grundläggande orsaken till massmigrationen i USA? Joshua Phillip delar med sig av sina upptäckter om illegal invandring. Han är undersökande journalist på The Epoch Times och har granskat gränskrisen i flera år.
Joshua Phillip, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Hey, Tiffany, always a pleasure.
Now, immigration has become one of the major issues for American voters. Now, this administration especially talks a lot about solving the root causes like poverty in other countries. But what about the root causes behind this mass migration that we are seeing at the southern border? Help us understand that.
Well, the root cause is that the federal government, mainly the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security, is actively facilitating the mass illegal immigration to the United States. The reality is, and I've been saying it for a few years now. I did an investigation. I was at the border. I went into Mexico and I researched it. What is happening is this. The United Nations is running the border crisis, and they're doing it using American taxpayer dollars. The organization of the UN running these operations is called the International Organization for Migration. They are giving the illegal immigrants literal cash cards, prepaid debit cards, and they're also giving them envelopes filled with cash. This was called the conspiracy theory and fake news, before, but just recently the United Nations 2024 budget was released and it's in there. And without a doubt, this is exactly what is happening. They are paying people cash and giving them cards to illegally travel to the United States. Once they get to the border, They then hand off a lot of these operations to various NGOs, nonprofit organizations. There's Hebrew groups, there's Catholic groups, there's Lutheran groups, there's all these different religious groups running these nonprofit organizations, which are not necessarily tied into the entire religions, but are people operating these at least under the name of religions, which of course gives them some additional legal protections. They are then busing, shipping, flying, and so on these illegal aliens all around the entire United States. And these organizations also get money from the United States in the form of our tax dollars, and they're also working under the coordination of the International Organization for Migration. In fact, they're even listed as members publicly on the under IOM. At the same time, too, the IOM, International Organization for Migration, has a joint office working directly with the U.S. State Department to coordinate these operations. And so in no way is this organic. This is a well-operating, very intended, it's intended to do this, operation meant to facilitate the bringing in of millions of people into the U.S.
Quite concerning indeed. You mentioned that U.S. tax dollars are helping to fund all of this. Why is the UN doing this? What's the reason here?
You hear two different narratives. Of course, they're talking about the humanitarian crisis, and they're saying that these are the narrative they're using to get a lot of these individuals refugee status and so on, is they say that they are climate refugees. They just, using the narrative of climate justice, they can claim that these individuals are fleeing the damage of climate change. In reality, if you listen to what the individuals kind of leading the circus are saying, what they will say is that this is meant to create global equity. They want to create a form of global equality, and that means balancing out the wealth of the first world nations, mainly the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, with the lack of wealth of many of these poorer countries. And so by flooding the United States, Western Europe, Canada, and other countries with the poorest of the third world countries, they believe they can start creating a form of global equity. The other form of that is what they call, and the CCP is pushing this, as is Russia, by the way, the overthrowing of what they call the unipolar world order.
Sounds in a way like the loss of freedom or the fabric that the United States was founded upon. Given that this is now openly stated in the UN's 24 budget, what can Americans do who don't want their tax dollars going to this?
Well, the funny thing with the border crisis is that it's technically a bipartisan issue. A lot of Democrats don't like it either. New York, Chicago, California, they're going bankrupt paying for it. They don't have the money for it. And you have to ask yourself, what makes it so important that the federal government is even suing Texas if they try to secure the border? They're trying to maintain the open border policy. What makes it so important to the federal government that they're willing to bankrupt New York? They're willing to cause, crime and chaos in a lot of areas. They're willing to risk people's lives, sending them to Chicago where it's freezing cold and where you'll die if you're stuck on the streets. It's so important to them that they're willing to do all of this. So what is it that they want? What is the real agenda for it? The money that is meant to help Americans is being denied to Americans and being given to illegal aliens violating the laws of our country, with what appears to be an intent to, lower the living standards of the United States and create a system of global equality where we've been lowered from our position. The quality of life becomes worse in order to benefit other countries. And I don't think that's in the interest of most Americans, personally.
And given that, what can Americans do if they do want to change this?
Well, I think the biggest thing in America we have is, of course, the fact that we still have elected government, at least for now. And I do think you should let your elected leaders know if you support it or don't support it. Call them, email them, let them know what's happening, because we now know for a fact that, yes, American tax dollars are being spent on this. Yes, this is a coordinated operation between the U.S. and the United Nations, and they can't deny it anymore.
Joshua, Philip, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, pleasure. Thank you.
Enligt Internationella valutafonden, IMF, kan artificiell intelligens komma att påverka 40% av alla jobb i världen. Organisationen vill att regeringarna vidtar åtgärder.
IMF vill att regeringar världen över ska vidta åtgärder och varnar för att artificiell intelligens kan ersätta jobb och öka ojämlikheten. Den nya rapporten publicerades precis före Världsekonomiskt forums årsmöte, där företagsledare och politiker samlas i Davos i Schweiz. Enligt IMF kommer avancerade ekonomier som USA att påverkas mest av AI. Dessa länder har fler jobb med kognitivt baserade uppgifter och har pengar och infrastruktur för att använda AI i stor utsträckning. I dessa länder kan, enligt IMF, nästan 60% av arbetstagarna komma att påverkas.
I hope that is literally everyone who uses a computer or touches a computer at any point during the day.
Bob Rogers är vd för OII AI som använder AI för att lösa problem i leveranskedjan. Rogers säger att det bara är vissa jobb som ersätts och att han för närvarande inte ser det hända över hela linjen. Han anser att många kan dra nytta av AI och tar som exempel kemister som försöker ta fram ett nytt läkemedel.
2 weeks of research identifying candidate chemicals can be replaced by a few hours of research when the research is enhanced by an AI search engine that's searching chemical research papers and other databases. So, when you think about that chemist is not going to be replaced simply because they were able to compress 2 weeks of work.
IMF varnar för att ojämlikheten kommer att öka eftersom inte alla kommer att dra nytta av AI. Detta kan leda till politisk instabilitet. IMF menar att världens regeringar bör vara proaktiva genom att införa omfattande sociala skyddsnät som omskolning av arbetstagare, genomföra politiska åtgärder som främjar rättvis tillgång till AI och samarbeta internationellt.
Spanska jordbrukare är de senaste att ansluta sig till protestvågen i Europa.
Jordbrukare i Spanien genomförde traktorprotester och blockerade motorvägar den 6 februari. De kräver förändringar i EU:s politik, fonder och åtgärder för att bekämpa produktionskostnadsökningar. Protesterna ägde rum samtidigt som jordbruksministeriet tillkännagav ett stöd på cirka 290 miljoner dollar. Stödet är avsett att kompensera för torka och problem som orsakats av kriget i Ukraina. Jordbrukarna säger att det inte är tillräckligt. De spanska jordbrukarna är de senaste att ansluta sig till denna våg av protester efter jordbrukare i Frankrike, Italien, Belgien och andra länder i Europa. Demonstrationerna förväntas fortsätta under de kommande veckorna med en stor protest i centrala Madrid senare denna månad.
Den australiensiska skådespelerskan Nicole Kidmans nya serie har gjort sin debut världen över. Trots att den spelats in i Hongkong hindras tittarna i samma stad från att se den. Vad utlöste censuren?
När Hongkongs nedstängning på grund av covid-19 var som värst fick den australiensiska filmstjärnan Nicole Kidman ett sällsynt undantag från stadens regering för att filma en ny serie. Hon var en av de få i filmteamet som fick gå fritt runt i staden, samtidigt som invånare och resenärer behövde vara i karantän. Expats är ett Amazon Prime-drama om utlänningar som bor i Hongkong, men när den släpptes förra månaden sändes den överallt förutom i just Hongkong. Filmen innehåller scener från paraplyrörelsen 2014 då tusentals prodemokratiska aktivister gick ut på gatorna för att kräva ett transparent val. Det hela började med att Peking föreslog en regel som gjorde det möjligt för kinesiska kommunistpartiet KKP att handplocka kandidater till valet i Hongkong. Expats är inte den enda serie som utsätts för censur i Hongkong. Disney Plus har tidigare tagit bort ett avsnitt av The Simpsons från sin tjänst där. Detta för att det refererade till Kinas tvångsarbetsläger. 2020 började Peking införa sin drakoniska nationella säkerhetslag i staden. Hundratals prodemokratiska aktivister har sedan dess gripits eller tvingats till exil. Underhållningsindustrin blev också en måltavla ett år senare när staden antog en lag som förbjuder filmer som anses kränka Kinas så kallade nationella säkerhet.
Samhällen i Asien välkomnar det nya månåret den 10 februari. I år är det drakens år enligt den kinesiska zodiaken.
Månens nyår är en tid då man samlas med familj och vänner. Vartenda år i den kinesiska zodiaken tros ha samma egenskaper som dess namngivna djur. 2024 är drakens år. Den mystiska varelsen är en symbol för lycka, styrka, hälsa och välstånd.
The year of 2024 is the year of the dragon. In the Chinese world, the dragon is a symbol of auspiciousness. In the past, emperors were represented by the dragon. It is a symbol of protection and auspiciousness.
Till festligheterna hör att besöka tempel och bränna rökelsepinnar till traditionella gudar och bringa lycka för de kommande månaderna. Besökarna vid detta tempel med undervattenstema i norra Taiwan är redan förväntansfulla.
The dragon represents the figure of everything, the most respected. In Taiwan, we say that the dragon soars high in the sky. It is a symbol of auspiciousness. This is why, in the past, emperors wore robes with dragons on them. This is how the dragon is known.
Drakens år inleds den 10 februari.
Och vi är strax tillbaka.
En föreställning som verkligen betyder något. För var och en av oss. Detta är vad du har väntat på. Köp biljetter nu på chenyun.com.
Det vietnamesiska kommunistpartiet bad sin kinesiska motsvarighet om omfattande stöd under Vietnamkriget. Men det här kom senare till att leda till fiendeskap mellan de två. För att kunna exportera revolutionen gav kinesiska kommunistpartiet massor av bistånd till Nordvietnam så att de skulle kunna fortsätta att slåss mot USA. Vi kommer nu att visa den andra delen av Revolution på export i specialserien Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. Filmen är baserad på boken How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World.
C. The Khmer Rouge. The CPV asked the CCP to provide large-scale assistance to Vietnam during the Vietnam War, but this later became one of the reasons China and Vietnam became hostile to each other. In order to export revolution, the CCP loaded Vietnam with huge amounts of aid in order to have it keep fighting the United States. Vietnam didn't want the war to drag out so long, so it joined the US-led four-nation talks, which excluded China from 1969. In the 1970s, after the Lin Biao incident, Mao urgently needed to establish prestige in China. In addition, Sino-Soviet relations had worsened after the Shenbao Island incident, a locally contained military conflict between the two powers. Mao thus cooperated with the United States to counteract the Soviet Union and invited U.S. President Richard Nixon to visit China. Meanwhile, facing opposition to the Vietnam War back home, the United States was reluctant to continue fighting. Vietnam and the United States signed a peace agreement. It was then that Vietnam drifted away from the CCP and came into the orbit of the Soviet Union. Mao was unhappy with this and decided to use Cambodia to put pressure on Vietnam. Relations between Vietnam and Cambodia became worse, and the two countries eventually went to war. The CCP's support for the Communist Party of Kampuchea, broadly known as the Khmer Rouge, began in 1955, with Khmer leaders receiving training in China. Pol Pot, the paramount leader of the Khmer Rouge regime, was appointed by Mao in 1965. Mao provided money and arms to the Khmer and, in 1970 alone, provided Pol Pot with weapons and equipment for 30,000 people. After the United States withdrew from French Indochina, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, the local governments were unable to resist the CCP-supported communists, and so the Laotian and Cambodian regimes fell into their hands in 1975. Laos fell to Vietnam while Cambodia came under the control of the CCP-backed Khmer Rouge. To implement the CCP's policy and to teach Vietnam a lesson, the Khmer Rouge repeatedly invaded southern Vietnam, which had been united by the CPV in 1975. It slaughtered residents at the Cambodian-Vietnamese border and tried to occupy the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. Meanwhile, Vietnam's relationship with the CCP was bad, while its relationship with the Soviet Union was good. With the support of the Soviets, Vietnam began attacking Cambodia in December 1978. After Pol Pot seized power, he ruled with extreme terror. He announced the abolition of currency, ordered all urban residents to join collective forced labor squads in the countryside, and slaughtered intellectuals. In little more than 3 years, more than a quarter of the country's population had been killed or had died from unnatural causes. Nevertheless, Pol Pot was promoted by CCP leaders Zhang Sun-chao and Dong Yin-chao. After the war between Vietnam and Cambodia began, the Cambodian people began to support the Vietnamese army. In just 1 month, the Khmer Rouge collapsed, lost the capital, Phnom Penh, and was forced to flee into the mountains and fight as guerrillas. In 1997, Pol Pot's erratic behavior caused quarrels within his own camp. He was arrested by Khmer commander Ta Mok and, in a public trial, was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 1998, he died from a heart attack. In 2014, despite the CCP's repeated attempts at obstruction, the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia sentenced 2 Khmer leaders, Khieu Sampan and Nguyen Chia, to life in prison. Vietnam's war in Cambodia infuriated Deng Xiaoping. For this and other reasons, Deng set off a war against Vietnam in 1979, calling it a counterattack for self-defense. D. Other parts of Asia. The CCP's export of revolution had painful repercussions for the Chinese diaspora. Numerous anti-Chinese incidents broke out around the world, and at least several 100,000 overseas Chinese were murdered. Many also had their right to do business and receive an education restricted. One typical example was in Indonesia. During the 1950s and 1960s, the CCP provided significant financial and military support to Indonesia to prop up the Communist Party of Indonesia, Partai Komunis Indonesia, or PKI. The PKI was the largest political group at the time, with 3 million direct members. Added to that, its affiliated organizations brought the combined total affiliates and members to 22 million, scattered across Indonesia's government, political system, and military, including many close to the first Indonesian president, Sukarno. Mao was criticizing the Soviet Union at the time for supporting revisionism and strongly encouraged the PKI to take the path of violent revolution. PKI leader Adit was an admirer of Mao and was preparing to stage a military coup. On September 30th, 1965, right-wing military leader Suharto crushed this attempted coup, cut ties with China, and purged a large number of PKI members. The cause of this purge is related to Zhou Enlai. During one of the international meetings between the communist countries, Zhou promised the Soviet Union and representatives of other communist countries, quote, "There are so many overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia. The Chinese government has the ability to export communism through these overseas Chinese and make Southeast Asia change color overnight." From this point on, large-scale anti-Chinese movements began in Indonesia. The anti-Chinese movement in Burma, also known as Myanmar, was similar. In 1967, soon after the start of the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese consulate in Burma, as well as the local branch of the Xinhua news agency, began heavily promoting the Cultural Revolution among overseas Chinese, encouraging students to wear Mao badges, study his Little Red Book, and confront the Burmese government. The military junta, under the rule of General Ne Win, gave orders to outlaw the wearing of badges with Mao's image and the study of Mao's writing, and to shut down Chinese schools. On June 26, 1967, a violent anti-Chinese incident took place in the capital Yangon, where dozens were beaten to death and hundreds injured. In July 1967, the CCP's official media called for, quote, firmly supporting the people of Myanmar under the leadership of the Communist Party of Burma, CPB, to start armed conflicts and start a major revolt against the Ne Win government. Soon after, the CCP sent out a military council team to assist the CPB, along with over 200 active soldiers to join them. They also ordered large groups of CPB members who had lived in China for many years to return to Burma and join the struggle. Afterward, a large number of Chinese Red Guards and CPB forces attacked Burma from Yunnan, defeating the Burmese government forces and taking control of the Hongkong region. More than 1,000 Chinese youth sent from Yunnan died on the battlefield. About the time of the Cultural Revolution, the CCP's attempts at exporting revolution involved the promotion of violence and the provision of military training, weapons, and funding. When the CCP stopped trying to export revolution, communist parties in various countries all disintegrated and were unable to recover. The Malaysian Communist Party was a typical case. In 1961, the Malaysian Communist Party, MCP, decided to abandon armed conflict and instead gain political power through legal elections. Deng Xiaoping called MCP leaders Qin Peng and others to Beijing, demanding that they continue their efforts at violent insurrection, because at the time the CCP believed that a revolutionary high tide centered around the Vietnamese battlefield would soon sweep Southeast Asia. The MCP thus continued its armed struggle and attempted revolutions for another 20 years. The CCP funded the MCP, having them procure arms on the black market in Thailand, and in January 1969 established the Malaysian Sound of Revolution radio station in Yiyang City, Hunan Province, to broadcast in Malaysian, Thai, English, and other languages. After the Cultural Revolution, during a meeting between Singapore's President Lee Kuan Yew and Deng Xiaoping, Lee requested that Deng stop the radio broadcasts of the MCP and the Communist Party of Indonesia into China. At the time, the CCP was surrounded by enemies and isolated, and Deng had just regained power and required international support, so he accepted the recommendation. Deng met with MCP leader Qin Peng and set a deadline to shut down the broadcasts agitating for communist revolution. In addition to the countries noted above, the CCP also attempted to export the revolution to the Philippines, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Japan, and elsewhere, in some cases providing military training, and in some cases spreading propaganda. Some of these communist organizations later became internationally acknowledged terrorist groups. For example, the Japanese Red Army, which became notorious for its anti-monarchist and pro-violent revolutionary slogans, was responsible for a plane hijacking, the massacre of civilians at an airport, and a range of other terrorist incidents.
Detta var den andra delen av del 5 i vår specialserie Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. Hela delen samt andra avsnitt finns på Ntd Sveriges kanaler på YouTube, Facebook och Ganjing World. Tack för att ni har tittat och på återseende!